for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Okay, John Buchanan there from the University of Sydney. Now, as I say, there are other guests to come in from different perspectives that they're going to bring us today. We are also joined here in the studio by the Australia Institute's Matt Gronbach. Matt, thanks for joining us. Before we start, we will just indicate to the viewers that we are on standby for the opposition leader, Bill Shorten, and the Shadow Treasurer, Chris Bowen, so we may halt our conversation momentarily when they arrive at the Commonwealth Parliamentary offices there in Sydney. But the Australia Institute, what's its readout? We know that, broadly speaking, you guys I might say on the higher side of taxation equation, probably not the user pay side. Just give us some general readout on this.
I think the Commission of Audit was very interesting in that it didn't even look at the taxation side at all, which is odd given that spending as a percentage of GDP is about average at the moment. It's not particularly high, despite what the government would like us to believe. And revenue, the amount of tax that they're collecting, is actually low. So the budget at the moment is in deficit because of a revenue problem, not a spending problem. So to sort of solve it with cutting spending is basically going to radically change how Australia is structured.
How would a Commonwealth trade back from where we are now with debt and deficit to a healthy surplus, let's say the one that the government's targeting, 1% of GDP in 10 years, without making some heavy cuts? Do you accept that some are required?
I think that some cuts can be done, and governments should always look at how efficiently they're spending money and cut away stuff that they don't think is no longer necessary. But the cuts that we've seen from the Commission of Audit predominantly affect middle and low income households. People on welfare payments are going to see their indexation slowed, effectively cutting the amount of money they get, while high income earners and businesses have been virtually untouched in this Commission of Audit. But certainly one way of solving the deficit problem would simply be to increase taxes and in any sort of range of different taxes. But so
on that score, you're actually on the same page as the Prime Minister and Joe Hockey with this much vaunted by now debt levy.
Yes, certainly. So, I mean, effectively the debt levy is an increase in income taxes, and we've seen income taxes over the last 10 years during the mining boom cut quite substantially. In fact, if we go back about 8 years, the tax cuts that have accumulated over that period are worth about $40 billion each year. The deficit's about $40 billion, if that gives you some indication of how big they are.
What about on the payments side? We've spoken a lot so far about co-payments on a whole range of measures. Is there any problem? Is there some capacity on the part of Middle Australia in particular to do some more heavy lifting there for the services that they receive?
Certainly. On the co-payment for visiting the GP, there's two reasons why you tax something. You either want to discourage its use or you want to raise revenue. Now, discouraging people from going to GPs is ultimately going to be bad for people's health, and it's going to be bad for the finance, the budget in the long term, because as people know, preventative health will save money in the long term. And the other reason, to raise revenue, well, sickness as a basis for revenue raising seems like about the strangest form of revenue raising ever. We can raise revenue through company taxes, we can raise it through income, but why do we want to raise it through people being sick?
And just briefly and finally, Matt Gronbach, the idea of states getting some action on income taxation, healthy for a competitive economy?
Perhaps. It's hard to say. It's certainly a huge shift and it will have profound implications. I think the way the system works now, where the federal government collects most of the revenue and then hands it back to the state, has worked us well over an extended period of time. So I haven't actually heard a really good case for changing that.
All right. Well, maybe we'll hear it or maybe we won't, depending which way the federal government ultimately jumps on that. But Matt Gronbach from the Australia Institute, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
We heard a little live earlier